टीवी नेटवर्क की पूरी टीम को
Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories this hour. US President Donald Trump says he is very unhappy with Israel's strikes on Doha, which killed 6 but missed Hamas's leaders, calling the attack a unilateral move that hurts both US and Israeli interests. Trump says the decision was Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's as global condemnation grows. Poland said it scrambled its own and NATO air defences to shoot down drones that violated its airspace during a massive Russian strike on western Ukraine. Military officials confirm weapons were used to neutralise the objects in the first such action since the war began. Iran and the UN nuclear watchdog announced a deal to resume inspections at facilities damaged by US and Israeli strikes in June, though details remain unclear. Tehran warns the agreement will collapse if Europe reimposes sanctions, even as it faces pressure to account for enriched uranium stockpiles. The global Samud flotilla says one of its boats was struck by a drone in a Tunisian port, the second such incident in 2 days, though all passengers were unharmed. The aid mission, backed by 44 countries and including activist Greta Thunberg, accuses Israel of the attack, while Tunisia denies the first strike and Israel declines to comment. A chartered plane carrying some 300 South Korean workers detained in a US immigration raid takes off from Georgia, with arrival expected in Seoul on Thursday. The return comes as Foreign Minister Cho Hyun meets Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Washington, seeking assurances such incidents will not happen again. The White House says it will support a forensic review of a letter reportedly signed by President Donald Trump in a birthday book for Jeffrey Epstein. Trump denies writing the note, which features a sketch and references to secrets, with aides insisting the signature is not his. For the first time, UNICEF says there are more children worldwide who are obese than underweight, with 1 in 10 aged 5 to 19 now affected. The UN agency blames ultra-processed foods and urges governments to protect children's diets from industry interference. French President Emmanuel Macron names 39-year-old Defence Minister Sébastien Lecornu as his new Prime Minister, signalling continuity with his pro-business agenda. The pick, a loyalist, could alienate left-wing allies and leave Macron reliant on far-right support in Parliament. Now we start with our top story this hour. Last night, Israel escalated its military campaign with a strike on Qatar aimed at killing Hamas's political leadership. The move marks a dangerous expansion of the conflict beyond Gaza and has drawn a sharp response from its closest ally, Washington. US President Donald Trump has voiced concern over the strikes on the Qatari capital. Speaking to reporters during a public appearance in Washington, Trump said, quote, "We want the hostages back, but we're not thrilled about the way it went down." Trump also confirmed speaking with both Netanyahu and Qatar's leaders and assured such a thing will not happen again on their soil. In fact, let's listen in to his statements.
I don't have to do that. I'm not thrilled about the whole situation. It's not a good situation. But I will say this, we want the hostages back, but we are not thrilled about the way that went down today. It'll happen. We have that one and we have Gaza going on. We want to get them both solved and ended.
Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said the Trump administration was notified by the US military just before the strike, but stressed Washington did not approve it, called it a unilateral Israeli action. She called the strike inside Qatar a sovereign US ally helping broker peace, unhelpful to American or Israeli goals. Let's listen in to Caroline Levitt's statements.
Trump administration was notified by the United States military that Israel was attacking Hamas. The president directed his special envoy Witkoff to immediately call the Qataris. And after the attack, he spoke to Prime Minister Netanyahu. The president made his thoughts and concerns about this very clear, and he spoke again both to Prime Minister Netanyahu and also the Emir and the Prime Minister of Qatar after this attack. And the president has always made it very clear that he wants peace in the Middle East, just like he sought that and accomplished that in his first term. He expects all of our allies and friends in the region, that includes both Qatar and Israel, to seek peace as well. And he wants to see that happen, and he's working with all of our allies in the region to get that done. The president also overstressed the importance of peace in the region in his conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu as well. And Prime Minister Netanyahu told President Trump he wants peace and he wants it quickly. That's what the president expects to happen. The president also spoke to the Emir and Prime Minister of Qatar and thanked them for their support and friendship to our country. He assured them that such a thing will not happen again on their soil. Absolutely was not the president's authentic signature, and we have maintained that position all along. The president did not write this letter, he did not sign this letter, and that's why the president's external legal team is aggressively pursuing litigation against the Wall Street Journal, and they will continue.
Now we have some more information for you. From inside Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he authorized what he called a surgical precision strike targeting top Hamas leaders in Doha, Qatar. He says the operation was a direct response to a deadly Hamas shooting near Jerusalem and the deaths of 4 Israeli soldiers in Gaza. Netanyahu also mentioned that the days are over when terror leaders can enjoy immunity of any kind. He emphasized that Israel will act wherever threats emerge, warning that no place is off limits. Netanyahu says the strike focused on top figures, including Hamas negotiator Khalil al-Hayya, and the strike, however, has drawn widespread global condemnation and may further threaten ongoing ceasefire efforts. Let's listen in to what the Israeli Prime Minister had to say.
At noon today, I convened the heads of Israel's security organizations and authorized a surgical precision strike on the terrorist chiefs of Hamas. These are the same terrorist chiefs who planned, launched, and celebrated the horrific massacres of October 7th. They perpetrated the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Now, they were meeting in the same place, exactly the same place, where they celebrated this savagery almost 2 years ago. At the beginning of the war, I promised that Israel would reach those who perpetrated this horror. And today, Israel and I have kept.
Now we have further reactions. The Qatari leadership has issued a statement on Israeli strikes targeting the members of the political bureau of Hamas in the Qatari capital. The Qatari Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani described the Israeli attacks as an act of state terrorism carried out by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The Qatari Prime Minister said that Qatar's air defense system was unable to detect Israel's missile strikes. He also stated that reports claiming Qatar was informed beforehand are false. In fact, he said the United States informed the Qatari authorities about the missile strike 10 minutes after the attack on Doha. Qatar has told the UN Security Council that it will not tolerate reckless Israeli behavior and will protect its sovereignty. The Qatari Prime Minister accused Israel of sabotaging the Gaza ceasefire talks. However, he stressed that Qatar will continue to play the role of mediator on various issues to promote stability in the region. Let's listen to the Qatari Prime Minister.
إن الهجوم الإسرائيلي اللي تم اليوم على أرض قطر ويعني لا نستطيع أن نسميه إلا بإرهاب دولة يمارسه شخص مثل نتنياهو في سياق هذه السياسات الممنهجة ومحاولاته المستمرة لزعزعة الأمن والاستقرار الإقليمي هي فقط رسالة واضحة للمنطقة ككل. وهذه الرسالة تقول أن هناك لاعب مارق في هذه المنطقة وهناك عربدة سياسية مستمرة في هذه المنطقة وانتهاك لسيادة الدول. نتنياهو بنفسه صرح بأنه سيعيد تشكيل الشرق الأوسط. هل هذه الرسالة بأنه سيعيد تشكيل الخليج أيضا؟ الوساطة في الدبلوماسية القطرية هي جزء من هذه الهوية وستستمر، ولن يثنينا أي شيء عن الاستمرار في هذا الدور في كافة القضايا المختلفة حولنا في المنطقة، وصولا لاستقرار المنطقة، وصولا لاستقرار شعوبنا.
Okay, we're now joined by Irina Sukerman. She is a senior journalist and she joins us live from New York in the United States. Thank you very much, Irina, for joining us here on the program. A lot to unpack here, of course. However, Benjamin Netanyahu's language is very direct, and he said that the perpetrators of October the 7th will not be safe wherever they are, even if that is on US ally soil, and risks throwing diplomatic negotiations in the air. Irina, just very briefly, because we've got a lot to cover here, what are your thoughts on the power dynamics here, given both the United States, Israel's and Qatar's statements that we just heard there?
What we witnessed is elaborate political theater because various actors had to distance themselves from any knowledge about what occurred. I think Qatar pretty much had no choice. I think it received advanced warning. Otherwise, we might have found some of the Qatari officials right next to the Hamas leadership that was targeted. It is no secret that Qataris have been telling Hamas to keep the hostages for the past 2 years, and certainly Israel would have notified them to get out of the way or face the strike. It's also obvious that without with US knowledge, something like that would have been difficult to coordinate, considering that there is a major US base in Qatar. It's not a coincidence that the strike followed Hamas' rejection of the ceasefire plan proposed by President Trump, which Israel had accepted. I think at this point, it has become obvious to Israel that Hamas had no intention of giving up the hostages or agreeing to any reasonable deal.
Yes, okay, Irina, do stay with us. We are staying on the same story, but we move and give our audience some more information. Hamas has released some statements and has reacted to the Israeli strikes targeting members of its political bureau in Doha. The Hamas political bureau member has stated that the group's top leadership survived the attack. However, he added that 5 of its members were killed in the strikes. One Qatari security officer was killed as well. The attack took place as Hamas negotiators were meeting to consider the latest ceasefire proposal, but put forward by the United States. Hamas has accused the United States of being jointly responsible with Israel for the attacks in Doha. The statement also said that these attacks would not change the demand for a ceasefire. Let's listen in to what the Hamas leader had to say.
رغم ذلك نقول بأن قيادة الحركة والحمد لله رب العالمين نجت من هذه المحاولة الجبانة، وأن قيادة الحركة الآن بخير كبير بفضل الله سبحانه وتعالى، ورد الله سبحانه وتعالى كيد هؤلاء المجرمين، رد الله كيد نتنياهو هذه العصابة الإجرامية إلى نحرها. ونقول مرة ثانية أن القيادة بخير. نؤكد للجميع أن هذه القيادة نجت، لكن قدر الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يرتقي مجموعة من الشهداء، وعلى رأسهم الأخ جهاد لبد رحمة الله عليه، هو مدير مكتب رئيس حركة حماس في قطاع غزة، إضافة إلى همام خليل الحية وهو نجل الشهيد القائد، هو نجل الأخ الحبيب أبو أسامة خليل الحية، إضافة إلى مجموعة من المرافقين انقطع الاتصال بهم كما.
Okay, Irina, we have just heard the Hamas political bureau member there. Of course, Doha is where these negotiations were taking place. Hamas and Qatar have both stated that they believe that the United States did have something to do with these strikes. How might these strikes affect going into an already fragile situation of negotiations in the Qatari capital?
very least, they should send a signal to Qatar that their interventionism on behalf of Hamas will no longer be tolerated by Israel, and perhaps they should reconsider their roles as mediators. You cannot be an arsonist and firefighter at the same time. Regarding the United States, it is understandable why the US president would want to keep himself at a distance from these events, but I think his real disappointment lies not in the fact of these strikes, but in the fact that the Hamas leadership was not ultimately eliminated. While Hamas leadership persists in remaining in Doha, it will continue to be seen as the real face of the movement. It will continue to organize and coordinate the operations in Gaza, as well as support for Hamas around the world, and it will continue to remain the source of funding, donations, and financial support for Hamas, which will complicate Israel's efforts to put an end to the organization.
Yes, Irina, we have some global reactions pouring in as leaders worldwide react strongly to these strikes in Doha. The United Nations General Antonio Guterres has called the strike a flagrant violation of Qatar's sovereignty and urged all sides to refocus on a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. According to reports, the UN Security Council will meet today on the Israel-Qatari strikes. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran, Egypt and the United Arab Emirates have all denounced the attack, warning it threatens regional stability and peace efforts. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has also condemned Israeli airstrikes on Doha, targeting leaders of Hamas on Tuesday, warning they threatened regional security and stability. European powers, including France, the UK, Germany, Spain and Italy, have all expressed deep concern about the incident. French President Macron called the strike unacceptable, while UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said it risks further escalation. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney also spoke out, calling the strike an intolerable expansion of violence, jeopardizing regional peace and undermining Qatar's constructive role. India has also urged restraint and diplomacy, expressing concern over regional security impact. As tensions rise, calls are growing for renewed diplomacy and accountability. Irina, accountability, do you think that Israel might be facing any of that today, given the global response and the condemnation from all sides about these strikes?
It's quite hypocritical on the part of the countries accusing Israel of violating Qatar's sovereignty after, first of all, Qatar is is hosting a terrorist organization, which, by the way, is designated as such by the United States, the European Union, and a number of other countries. So, at the very least, Israel is doing all these countries a favor, since Qatar has repeatedly rejected expelling these terrorist leaders or putting them on trial. The second, none of these countries had anything to say about a terrorist attack that took place yesterday when Hamas had killed 6 Israeli civilians and wounded many others. Once again committing a terrorist attack after October 7th, the worst attack on Israeli soil in decades. And it's actually quite surprising, or I should say perhaps not surprising, that all of these countries are so focused on Qatar's sovereignty and are not focused on Qatar's funding of terrorism around the region, which has destabilized their own countries and not just Israel. So perhaps they should be worried less about Qatari sovereignty and more about Qatar complying with the rule of law.
Yes, Irina Sukerman, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. We will, of course, bring you all updates from the Middle East as soon as we get them here on NewsX World. We, however, move over to Europe next, where Poland has confirmed a major breach of its airspace, saying Russian drones have crossed from Ukraine during Moscow's latest wave of strikes. Warsaw says its air defensive, backed by NATO allies, were scrambled and weapons were deployed against the hostile objects. Additionally, Prime Minister Donald Tusk confirmed that weapons were used against the drones and the operation is ongoing. The Polish military has also stated that the airspace was repeatedly violated, with operations underway to identify and neutralize targets. Defence officials say that the President and Prime Minister have been fully briefed. All services are on alert and territorial defence forces are conducting ground searches. Authorities have urged people in Podlaski, Mezakałki and Lubelski region to remain indoors while search teams hunt for downed objects. The public is being urged not to approach any fragments of drones and to report them to the police. Poland has also informed NATO and is in constant contact with the alliance. Meanwhile, Ukraine's Air Force warned drones had threatened the city of Zamosk, with reports also pointing to Rezekau. US authorities confirmed airspace restrictions near Warsaw and Rezau due to military activity. We're now joined by Professor Veselin Popovsky. He's a professor and vice dean at Jindal Global Law School, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us here, Professor Popovsky, here on the program. A huge development here in something that could be massive. What is the significance of this? Of course, this is the first time this has happened into a war which is now approaching 4 years. What is your read that possible Russian drones could be encroaching into not just Polish airspace, but also into NATO airspace?
Actually, it's not the first time. It happened a year and a half ago. There were also debris falling into the Polish territory. In fact, 2 persons at that time died. There were casualties in Poland. But this is significant. As you said, it's already the airspace of a NATO member, and much more massive than the previous time was basically debris falling. Now we have drones operating in the airspace of a NATO member. So I'm sure NATO will take this very seriously. And one reaction should be to consider no-fly zone over Ukraine. Actually, I've been advocating this for many, many months and years. NATO should take seriously those incidents and should think of how to protect the air space of not only Poland, but also Ukraine itself, which will reduce the civilian casualties out of the war. Obviously, until now, that has been avoided. There were hesitance to do that, mostly not to escalate the conflict and not to put some more foot for Putin to claim this is a war between NATO and Russia rather than Russia and Ukraine only. But it's time to take that step. I'm in a strong opinion that NATO shouldn't worry anymore about escalate. It's Russia that escalates. It's not NATO that. NATO has been very patient, very calm and silent so far. Apart from helping Ukraine with military equipment, they haven't done anything else. And it's high time to establish a no-fly zone over the entire airspace of Ukraine, which will obviously make a significant impact. And any Russian military object in the airspace of Ukraine is a military target that NATO Air Force should be able to gun down. And if that happens, that will change, I think, significantly the equation and make Russia think twice what to do next.
Yes, and Professor Popovsky, obviously we can't speculate here what's going on. However, what does this behavior possibly signal? What could the Russians be doing here with these drone actions?
Well, we see also similar action on the border with Finland. Some Russian troops mobilization and movement around the other borders with the Baltic states. So generally, for Moscow, this is a they would like to send a signal that they are ready to fight, and not only with Ukraine, but also with other neighboring countries, the Baltic states and Finland. So Poland is not an exception, but Poland is very significant here, and it is a major supporter for Ukraine. It's a neighboring country with very much historical and cultural heritage together. So again, you are right, it's difficult to speculate, but the escalations come from Moscow. That's absolutely clear. On this, there is no ambiguity. NATO has been patient. NATO has not done any provocation against Russia, and not only now, by the way, for the 75 years of its existence, never ever a single bullet was shot from NATO to Russia. So any talks about threats from NATO to Russia are absolutely nonsense. There is no threat from NATO to Russia. This is Moscow propaganda. So for that matter, let's put things clearly now. It's escalating. Who is the aggressor? Who is the war criminal? And NATO countries, again, my hope and belief is that they will get together, get serious, establish a no-fly zone, and get engaged a bit more with even their air force in Ukraine.
Professor Veselin Popovsky, thank you very much for joining us and giving us your insight on that. And we will, of course, bring you all updates in that developing story as it unfolds. We now move over to the Indo-Pacific, where in Nepal, Army Chief General Ashok Raj Sigdel has called on anti-corruption protesters to halt their demonstrations and come to the table for talks following the resignation of Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli. The move comes after 2 days of violent unrest sparked by a controversial social media ban. Let's listen in to what he said.
नेपालमा हाल भइरहेको आन्दोलनको क्रममा हुन पुगेको जनधनको अपूरणीय क्षतिप्रति गहिरो दुःख प्रकट गर्दै दिवंगत आत्माको चिर शान्तिको कामना गर्नुका साथै शोक सन्तप्त परिवारजनप्रति नेपाली सेना हार्दिक संवेदना र सहानुभूति प्रकट गर्दछ। साथै घाइते बिरामीहरूको शीघ्र स्वास्थ्य लाभको कामना समेत गर्दछौँ। आन्दोलनको क्रममा हालसम्म धेरै जनधनको क्षति भइसकेको हुँदा जनधनको थप क्षति हुन नदिन र शान्ति, सुरक्षा, अमन, चयन एवं राष्ट्रिय एकता र सद्भाव कायम गर्नु हामी सबै नेपालीको साझा दायित्व हो। वर्तमान असहज परिस्थितिलाई सामान्यीकरण गर्दै राष्ट्रिय एवं ऐतिहासिक सम्पदा, सार्वजनिक एवं नागरिकहरूको सम्पत्ति, आम नागरिक, मित्र राष्ट्रका कूटनीतिक नियोग तथा नागरिकहरूलाई सुरक्षाको प्रत्याभूति दिई राष्ट्रको सर्वोपरि हितको रक्षा गर्नु हामी सबैको साझा कर्तव्य हो। तसर्थ यस विषम परिस्थितिबाट राष्ट्रलाई शान्तिपूर्ण तवरले निकास दिनको लागि आन्दोलनरत समूहलाई आन्दोलनका कार्यक्रमहरू स्थगन गरी वार्ताको निमित्त आह्वान गर्दछौँ। जय मातृभूमि, जय देश।
United Nations Human Rights Chief Volker Turk has condemned the escalating violence and urged an independent probe into the deaths of protesters. Let's hear it.
I'm appalled by the escalating violence in Nepal that has resulted in multiple deaths and the injury of hundreds of mostly young protesters, as well as the widespread destruction of property. I plead with security forces to exercise utmost restraint and to avoid further such bloodshed and harm. Violence is not the answer. Dialogue is the best and only way to address the concerns of the Nepalese people. It is important that the voices of young people are heard. Protesters have the right to express peacefully their political frustrations and grievances over corruption and a ban on social media platforms. I have received concerning reports of unnecessary and disproportionate use of force by the security forces. I call for an urgent, thorough, transparent and impartial investigation into such acts. I'm also disturbed by reports of public buildings, businesses and private residents being attacked and in some instances set ablaze. Equally, I'm concerned by reports of physical attacks on senior government officials.
Now, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has called the scenes in Nepal heart-rending and appealed for calm, stressing that peace and stability in Nepal are vital for the region. We're now joined by Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev. He's a former Indian ambassador and he joins us live from New Delhi in India. Thank you very much for joining us here, Ambassador Sachdev. This has escalated in such a fast manner over the couple of days. Now people in the region and leaders are urging calm after the deaths of nearly 20 protesters after these riots and the Prime Minister stepping down. Do you think that this will de-escalate anytime soon?
Thank you for having me. I
Pleasure.
do believe that the appeals by Nepalese army chief as well as Indian Prime Minister and others would have salubrious consequence. And I have reasons to say this because situation seemed to have de-escalated on the ground already, although it's all very tentative. The immediate provocations, including the revocation of the ban on social media outfits, as well as resignation of the tainted ministers and other officials, has assuaged the sense of hurt long felt by Generation Z and others in the masses. Now, much would depend on how does army take control of the situation, whether it's able to set up a timetable, have a transitional government, have a new constitution, and hold elections in due date. Nepalese armed forces are highly regarded by the population. They are possibly the only institution that still invokes patriotism and trust. So let's hope that this leads to de-escalation over a longer period and we have a smooth transition to normalcy.
Yes, Ambassador Sachdev, thank you very much for your insight and thank you for taking the time and joining us here on the programme. Well, that is all that we have time for this hour, but we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.